There are stories we were taught to dismiss as myth, fragments of ancient memory where humanity had not yet written history, but already possessed knowledge and power that seemed to belong to another world. Scattered across forgotten manuscripts, from the Dead Sea Scrolls hidden in desert caves to the clay tablets of Sumer, there emerges a pattern too consistent to ignore. They speak of watchers who descended from the skies, of gods who walked among mortals, of giants who roamed the earth before the great flood swept them away. Were these symbols and allegories meant only to inspire, or were they records of encounters with beings far beyond our understanding? If so, why has official history erased or silenced these accounts? Was the truth simply too unbelievable, or was it deliberately hidden to preserve order and power? These questions lead us into a space where the line between history and legend dissolves, where ancient voices whisper of knowledge that was lost and civilizations that were buried. This is not a fairy tale. It is a journey backward through time, piecing together the echoes left in stone, scripture, and myth, until the past begins to look uncomfortably different from what we thought we knew. Welcome to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. When people open a history book, the story often begins in the same familiar way. Hunters and gatherers, slowly mastering fire, gradually forming villages, then cities, and eventually nations. It is a neat progression, a line drawn straight across time, a comforting tale of slow but inevitable development. But what if that line is an illusion? What if, long before the first dynasties of Egypt, long before Mesopotamia raised its ziggurats to the sky, there was another story unfolding, one so deeply buried in time that it lingers only as whispers across cultures? Hidden in manuscripts long forgotten, in myths that refuse to fade, there lies a suggestion that humanity's rise was neither solitary nor accidental. In 1946, on the barren cliffs above the Dead Sea, a group of Bedouin shepherds stumbled into a cave while chasing a lost goat. What they found was not treasure of gold or silver, but jars filled with brittle scrolls that had rested untouched for nearly 2 millennia. These fragments, later known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, contained religious texts, hymns, and prophecies, but among them, something far stranger. The Book of Enoch. This was not the Enoch briefly mentioned in the Bible with just a handful of sentences. This was a whole saga, a collection of 5 separate books, filled with visions of angels, journeys through the heavens, and warnings of a coming flood. It told of watchers, celestial beings sent to observe humanity, who eventually broke their oath and walked among mortals. They took wives from the daughters of men, and from this forbidden union came the Nephilim, giants who towered over ordinary people and shook the earth with their violence. The Book of Enoch reads not like parable, but like testimony. It describes mountains, rivers, stars, and even the farthest edges of the world, as if dictated by someone who had truly seen them from above. It portrays Enoch himself not as a distant prophet, but as a man chosen to mediate between the divine and the fallen, a messenger who pleaded for mercy even as the corruption of the watchers spread across the earth. The consequence, it said, was a catastrophe that would wipe the slate clean. The Great Flood. Here, the story collides with something familiar. The tale of Noah. But from a perspective far different than the one most of us were taught. Scholars have long argued that myths of a flood appear in too many cultures to be coincidence. From the Sumerians, who told of Utnapishtim saving his family in a great boat, to the legends of India, China, and the Americas, the theme repeats. The world overwhelmed by water, a chosen few surviving, and a new age beginning. Science, too, has found evidence of massive floods at the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers raised sea levels catastrophically. Could the myth and the geology be two views of the same event? And if so, why do so many of these myths link the flood not only to nature, but to punishment? Punishment for transgressions between gods and humans, for knowledge given too soon, for powers that were never meant to be shared. The Nephilim, described in the Book of Enoch, were not gentle beings. They were giants who devoured the labor of men, consuming crops and livestock until famine spread. Then, the texts say, they turned to darker hungers, devouring human flesh. Their presence was a distortion of the natural order, a living reminder of boundaries broken. When the cries of humanity reached the heavens, judgment followed. The Watchers, those angels who had fallen, were cast into a prison beneath the earth. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were doomed to perish in the deluge that swept across continents. Yet Enoch himself, it is said, did not die. Instead, he was carried away in a chariot of fire, lifted into the heavens so that his knowledge would not be lost. For centuries, the Book of Enoch was read by early Christians and Jewish sects. Church fathers like Clement of Alexandria and Tertullian quoted it as sacred text. But when the canon of the Bible was finally shaped, the book was excluded. It vanished from the West, surviving only in fragments, until the Ethiopian church preserved it in its entirety. Why was it removed? Perhaps because it told a story too unsettling, one that blurred the line between heaven and earth, between the divine and the human. Or perhaps because it suggested that humanity was not the sole architect of its own destiny, that our story began with intervention, with mingling between worlds we barely understand. If this sounds like myth, consider how often similar motifs echo elsewhere. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, those who came from heaven to earth, who imparted knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and kingship. The Greeks told of gods descending to love mortals, producing demigods of great power. The Irish spoke of the Fomorians, giant beings who once ruled their lands. The Norse told of frost giants, older than the gods themselves. Even across oceans, Native American stories recall races of giant men who once walked the plains. Could all of these cultures, separated by time and geography, simply invent the same theme? Or were they all remembering the same event, refracted through their own languages and landscapes? Travelers, too, recorded tales of giants. Marco Polo wrote of enormous men in Zanzibar, so strong they could carry the load of 4 ordinary men. In Morocco, legends tell of a giant founder of Tangier. In Ireland, the basalt columns of the Giant's Causeway are said to be the work of a giant named Finn McCool, who built them as a bridge to Scotland. And in more recent times, explorers like Magellan reported encounters with towering figures in Patagonia, describing men so tall that even the tallest Europeans barely reached their waist. These accounts are often dismissed as exaggerations or misunderstandings, but they pile up across centuries like stones in a forgotten wall. Archaeology, too, has its puzzles. In Lebanon, the massive stones of Baalbek weigh more than 1,000 tons each, cut and placed with a precision modern cranes would struggle to manage. In Egypt, sarcophagi large enough to hold beings several meters tall lie empty in the Serapeum of Saqqara. In Siberia, colossal granite blocks rest atop mountains, weighing more than 3,000 tons. Who moved them? How? And why do so many ancient traditions attribute such works to giants or to gods rather than to ordinary human labor? As night falls and the mind drifts into the quiet between waking and dreaming, these questions linger. They do not demand belief, only curiosity. They invite us to look at the past not as a closed book, but as a story with missing chapters, erased lines, and whispers beneath the margins. The Book of Enoch, rediscovered after centuries of silence, is one of those whispers. It suggests that our history is not what we think it is, that once, long ago, beings walked this earth who were neither fully human nor fully divine. And though the flood may have washed away their presence, it could not erase their memory. It remains buried in myth, carved in stone, waiting for those willing to listen. The story of Enoch does not stand alone. When we turn to the earliest civilizations that left us writing carved into clay, the parallels grow even harder to ignore. The Sumerians, living in the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, recorded their memories in wedge-shaped cuneiform. These tablets, some dating back more than 4,000 years, describe encounters with powerful beings who descended from the heavens. They called them the Anunnaki, a word meaning those who came down from above. To the Sumerians, these were not distant gods watching from the clouds, but figures who walked among them, taught them, and even shaped their destiny. The very beginnings of agriculture, metallurgy, astronomy, and kingship are credited to these visitors. The sudden leap from scattered tribes to organized city-states with libraries and law codes has long puzzled historians. But in the myths of Mesopotamia, the explanation was clear. Knowledge was given, not discovered. Among these tales, there is one that mirrors the Book of Enoch so closely that the two seem to be telling the same story in different tongues. The Anunnaki, like the Watchers, broke boundaries and took human women. From these unions came beings of mixed nature, part mortal, part divine. They were heroes, kings, and sometimes monsters, towering figures whose strength set them apart. Later traditions would call them Nephilim, demigods, or giants. Their presence was celebrated in epic poetry, but also feared, for their appetites were vast and their tempers destructive. When their violence became too great, the Sumerian texts describe how the gods unleashed a cataclysm, a flood meant to cleanse the earth. The echoes are unmistakable. Archaeologists working in Mesopotamia uncovered hundreds of clay tablets in the ruins of Nineveh, once the proud city of the Assyrian kings. Among them were copies of the Epic of Gilgamesh, a poem that has survived almost 5 millennia. In it, the hero Gilgamesh, himself said to be 2/3 divine, seeks the secret of immortality. Along his journey, he learns of a flood that once destroyed humanity, leaving only one man, Utnapishtim, who survived with his family and livestock in a great boat. The similarities to Noah's Ark are not coincidental. Biblical scholars acknowledge that the Genesis account was shaped by older Mesopotamian traditions. But what is most intriguing is that the story of the flood is always tied not only to human sin, but to the presence of those half-divine beings who should not have existed. The disaster was not just natural, but cosmic, a resetting of the world order. Modern science, too, adds weight to these ancient voices. Geological studies of the Black Sea region suggest that around 7,500 years ago, rising seas from melting glaciers burst through the Bosphorus, flooding a vast freshwater lake and creating the sea we know today. The force of water pouring in was catastrophic, the equivalent of 200 Niagara Falls crashing day after day. Villages on the shores would have been drowned, their people scattered. Is it coincidence that so many flood myths cluster in the same era? Or is it memory, embellished, retold, but rooted in a real event so traumatic it scarred cultures across continents? But what unsettles the most is not the flood itself. It is the suggestion that before this event, humanity was already living in the shadow of beings who were not entirely human. In the Book of Enoch, they were the Watchers. In Sumer, they were the Anunnaki. In later traditions, they became the Titans of Greece, the Fomorians of Ireland, the Frost Giants of the Norse. Different names, same idea. A race older, stronger, larger than men, existing at the boundaries of myth and memory. Could they all be inventions, convenient symbols for forces of chaos and order? Perhaps. But why then do cultures separated by oceans and centuries describe them in such similar ways? Even the details overlap. The mountain of Hermon, on the border of modern Lebanon and Syria, is described in both the Book of Enoch and Mesopotamian texts as the place where these heavenly beings descended. To this day, its peaks are scattered with ancient ruins, altars, and sanctuaries, as though it has long been marked sacred. In the Babylonian version of the Gilgamesh epic, Mount Hermon is mentioned as the dwelling place of the gods. The overlap is so striking that it challenges the idea of isolated myths. Instead, it suggests a shared memory, told and retold across generations until the original event was cloaked in legend. Those who look for evidence in stone rather than story point to monuments that defy explanation. In Baalbek, Lebanon, 3 immense stones rest at the base of an ancient platform, each weighing more than 1,000 tons. How they were quarried, moved, and placed remains unanswered. Mainstream explanations speak of human ingenuity, of ropes and levers and sheer determination. But in local tradition, these were the works of giants. The stones are so massive that even modern cranes struggle to move them. The question lingers. Was there once a race for whom such feats were ordinary? Legends of giants appear again and again. The Greeks told of the Gigantomachy, a war between gods and giants that shook the earth. The Bible speaks of the sons of Anak, so large that the Israelites compared themselves to grasshoppers in their sight. Norse sagas describe the Jotnar, beings older than the gods themselves. Even explorers of the early modern age wrote of encounters with unusually tall tribes, from Magellan's chronicles in Patagonia to John Smith's descriptions in North America. Skeptics dismiss these as exaggerations or mistranslations. Yet when combined with archaeological puzzles and recurring myths, they form a mosaic too complex to wave away. In the end, what we find is a pattern: forbidden unions, hybrid beings, catastrophic floods, and civilizations reborn with knowledge they should not have had. It is a story that repeats across the world, in every language, under every sky. Perhaps it is a story invented to explain the unexplainable. Or perhaps it is history. Our history, seen through the distorted glass of myth, waiting for us to recognize it. If we follow the thread further back, even beyond Mesopotamia, we find the Egyptians weaving similar patterns into their own memory of the world. Their gods, too, were not distant abstractions, but rulers who once walked among men, bringing with them architecture, writing, and laws. Among them, one figure stands out, Thoth, often depicted with the head of an ibis, called the Lord of Time and the Guardian of Wisdom. To the Greeks, he was Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great, and to Arab traditions he was Idris, a sage of immense age. Some even claimed that Thoth and Enoch were one and the same, a single figure remembered differently across cultures. Both were said to vanish not in death, but in ascension, taken away by the gods because their knowledge was too great to be lost. If so, what does it mean that two civilizations, separated by deserts and centuries, both carried the memory of a man who walked between heaven and earth? The Egyptians built monuments whose scale continues to unsettle us. The Great Pyramid at Giza rises with such precision that its alignment with the stars has inspired centuries of speculation. Official history calls it a tomb, a massive stone mountain built to honor a pharaoh. But alternative traditions whisper another story, that it was a repository of knowledge, a beacon aligned with celestial patterns, or even a structure inherited from a time before the pharaohs. Ancient writers like the geographer al-Makrizi recorded tales that Enoch, known to them as Hermes, was the one who ordered the pyramids built, filling them with sacred texts to preserve wisdom from the coming flood. Could this be the same Enoch whose book described the Watchers and the Nephilim, the same man said to have been taken to the heavens in fire? If we look closely at Egyptian myth, another familiar theme emerges: the flood. The texts speak of a time called Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods ruled directly on earth. Harmony existed until it was broken, and the world was punished by waters that swept across the land. In these stories, 7 sages survived, bearing the knowledge of the gods, and rebuilt civilization along the Nile. Strikingly, many other cultures also speak of 7 wise men appearing after cataclysm, whether in Babylon, India, or among the Dogon people of Africa. Each tradition insists that these figures were not ordinary men, but messengers, teachers, or remnants of a race before our own. The pattern repeats too perfectly to dismiss. Legends also describe strange devices and powers belonging to Thoth: a mirror that could see across vast distances, a bird that could sing news from far away, and tablets inscribed with emerald that recorded the laws of the cosmos. These sound like magic in one age and like technology in another. Could it be that the myths preserved a distorted memory of objects beyond their understanding? Nikola Tesla once said that the secrets of the universe lie in energy, frequency, and vibration. It is tempting to hear an echo of that idea in the ancient texts where Enoch speaks of thunder and lightning as mysteries of creation. The Egyptians were not alone in preserving these echoes. In the far-off myths of the Greeks, the Titans were overthrown in a great war, banished beneath the earth, yet their offspring remained, demigods, heroes, and giants who shaped the world. Hesiod wrote of an age of demi-divine men, stronger and nobler than the humans who followed. The parallels to the Watchers and the Nephilim are uncanny. Nor was Greece unique. In Ireland, the Fomorians were said to be monstrous giants who ruled before being driven into the sea. In Norse myth, the frost giants existed before the gods themselves, their blood forming the rivers and seas. In each story, a race older, larger, and more powerful stands at the dawn of human memory, only to be cast down by catastrophe or divine decree. If these are only myths, why do they align so closely? Why do they all speak of forbidden unions, hybrid beings, floods, and the survival of hidden knowledge? Some argue that myths are archetypes, stories that emerge from the collective human psyche, repeating because they express universal truths. That may be so. But it may also be that they are memories, imperfectly preserved, of events that truly happened. Just as the memory of an ancient eruption lingers in Pacific Island myths as the wrath of a volcano god, so too might the memory of the Nephilim and the flood survive as the stories of giants and gods. Archaeological discoveries occasionally sharpen the blur of myth. In 1881, near the Nile, researchers uncovered skeletal remains measuring over 7 feet in length, with skulls far larger than those of normal men. These finds were quietly stored away, rarely displayed, dismissed as anomalies. Yet stories of similar discoveries surface again and again, only to vanish into obscurity. Could it be that such remains do not fit the narrative we have chosen to believe, and so they are forgotten? The further we look, the more the puzzle deepens. Across continents in Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec spoke of giants who once built massive cities before being destroyed by floods and fire. In South America, legends of Viracocha describe a godlike figure who brought civilization after a deluge. Even in Polynesia, chants tell of great beings who came from the stars, mated with human women, and gave rise to a race of powerful rulers. How could all these cultures, isolated by oceans, tell the same kind of story? Either humanity is unimaginably consistent in its imagination, or it is remembering something real, something shared, something we have tried to forget. When the night grows quiet and the mind drifts, it is easy to feel the weight of these stories pressing close. They invite us not to believe blindly, but to wonder. What if the past is not what we think? What if our beginnings are tangled with beings we can no longer see, beings whose presence survives only in myth, ruins, and whispers carved into stone? The Book of Enoch, the tales of the Anunnaki, the myths of Egypt and Greece, they are not separate stories but fragments of one great tapestry, one that hints at a chapter of history erased by flood and fire, yet still echoing in our dreams. To move forward in this labyrinth of ancient memory, we must step into the shadow of the giants themselves. The Book of Enoch portrays them not as noble titans, but as savage beings, consuming the harvest of mankind, stripping the land bare, and then turning to violence and cannibalism when nothing was left. It is an unsettling image. Vast figures with appetites beyond control, bringing famine and terror to the people who once looked upon them with awe. In the story, their very existence was proof of a boundary broken, a line between divine and mortal that was never meant to be crossed. And so the flood becomes less a random catastrophe and more an act of cosmic judgment, an attempt to cleanse the world of a corruption too deep to heal. But traces of these beings linger far beyond Scripture. In the Hebrew Bible, the Israelites spy upon the land of Canaan and report the presence of the Anakim, descendants of the Nephilim, so large that the Israelites felt like grasshoppers before them. Later texts speak of battles with the Rephaim, Emim, and Zamzumim, tribes remembered not as myths, but as enemies, tall and formidable. Even the tale of David and Goliath, stripped of its allegory, is the story of a boy facing a warrior who stood over 9 feet tall, clad in armor that weighed more than most men could lift. Skeptics suggest exaggeration, yet ancient chroniclers listed these giants by name, placing them within genealogies and territories, treating them as real adversaries rather than symbolic monsters. Legends of giants are not confined to the Middle East. In Ireland, the basalt columns of the Giant's Causeway are attributed to Finn McCool, who built the bridge to Scotland to challenge another giant. In Norse sagas, the Jotnar waged endless wars against the gods, their size and strength shaping the world itself. Among the Celts, the Fomorians were sea-born giants who demanded tribute and sacrifices until they were overthrown. In the Americas, the Pawnee spoke of tall, red-haired warriors who lived in caves before vanishing into legend. And in the journals of early explorers, the pattern repeats. Magellan's chronicler Antonio Pigafetta described men in Patagonia so tall that the tallest sailors barely reached their waist. Conquistadors in Mexico were shown femurs said to belong to a vanished race of giants. Could all of these accounts be fantasy? Or are they scattered memories of something the Earth itself once witnessed? Archaeological puzzles seem to give weight to the stories. In Baalbek, Lebanon, a single-cut stone, called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, lies partially quarried, weighing over 1,000 tons. Nearby, even larger blocks remain, some estimated at 1,200 tons. Moving them would challenge today's most advanced cranes. Yet these stones were cut, transported, and placed thousands of years ago. Who commanded such strength? And why do the local traditions always answer with the same word? Giants? In Egypt's desert necropolis of Saqqara, the Serapeum contains massive granite sarcophagi, each large enough to hold beings far taller than ordinary humans. They lie empty, their lids askew, as if whatever they once contained has been deliberately removed. Some dismiss them as ceremonial, but the unsettling scale remains unexplained. In 2002, whispers of giants moved from myth to modern rumor. In the mountains of Afghanistan, a unit of American soldiers vanished while on patrol. The team sent to search for them reported something extraordinary. A figure over 12 feet tall, with fiery red hair and double rows of teeth, emerging from a cave with a spear in hand. The story claims that one soldier was killed before the giant was brought down by concentrated gunfire, its body flown away under military secrecy. Official accounts deny the event, yet the tale persists, retold by servicemen who swear they were there. Is it merely a fabrication, a soldier's legend born of fear and war, or a rare glimpse into something that still hides in the remote places of the world? If such beings once walked the earth, perhaps their remains still lie buried. Stories of hidden skeletons surface again and again. In the 19th century, American newspapers frequently reported the discovery of enormous bones, femurs as long as a man, skulls of unusual size, only for the artifacts to vanish into private collections or museum basements. Critics argue these were misidentified fossils of prehistoric animals. Yet the persistence of the reports, year after year, suggests either a grand mistake repeated endlessly or the deliberate erasure of inconvenient evidence. If giants existed, even in small numbers, their bones would rewrite human history, challenging the boundaries of what we believe possible. What strikes most deeply is how humanity has remembered them. They are not described as gentle or wise. Instead, they are remembered as violent, destructive, and alien in appetite. This may explain why so many traditions portray their end as necessary, even merciful. The flood was not just the punishment of humanity, but the eradication of a dangerous race, an attempt to restore balance. Yet the memory of them lingers, carved into stories, painted in myths, etched in stone. It is as though the world itself cannot forget, even when the bones are gone. And so the giants haunt the imagination, half shadow, half memory. Perhaps they were never real. Perhaps they are the embodiment of our fear of forces too great to control, our way of explaining ruins too vast to understand. But perhaps, just perhaps, they were real beings who walked beside our ancestors, towering over them, shaping their myths, and leaving marks that still puzzle us today. The earth is full of mysteries, and in the silence of its deserts, caves, and mountains, the truth may still be waiting. The flood is remembered as a punishment, but also as a dividing line, the moment when the world before was swept away and something new began. In the Book of Enoch, the flood was not simply a cleansing of human corruption. It was the erasure of the Nephilim, the offspring of forbidden unions that had broken the order of creation itself. Yet even as the waters rose, there is a suggestion that knowledge survived, carried forward into the world after. That survival is the thread that binds the myths of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond. They speak not only of destruction, but of a remnant, a chosen figure, warned in advance to build a vessel and preserve life. In Genesis, this is Noah. In Sumer, it is Utnapishtim. In Babylon, it is Atrahasis. The names change, but the role does not. The one who outlives the catastrophe and becomes the bridge between worlds. Archaeologists, digging through layers of sediment, have uncovered evidence of floods that devastated early settlements. In the plains of Mesopotamia, deposits of river mud several feet thick lie between layers of human habitation, suggesting sudden, massive inundation. In the Black Sea, sonar surveys have revealed the remains of ancient coastlines drowned beneath its waters, pointing to a catastrophe when seawater surged in from the Mediterranean. These findings do not prove the myths, but they anchor them, reminding us that behind the language of gods and giants, there may lie the memory of real disasters, witnessed by terrified eyes and carried into story. But what is striking is that these myths rarely end with loss alone. Instead, they pivot toward continuity. A survivor chosen by the gods, entrusted with seeds, animals, or knowledge to begin again. In the story of Noah, it is the Ark and the Rainbow Covenant. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim is granted immortality as a reminder of what was saved. Among the Greeks, Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulate the world after casting stones behind them that transform into men and women. The Maya tell of people of wood destroyed by flood, replaced by those of maize who carry on. It is as though every culture insists that humanity is not merely washed away but remade, and that the knowledge of the past, though scarred, endures. In Egypt, the idea takes another shape. Zep Tepi, the first time, is remembered not just as an age of gods, but as an era restored after calamity. 7 sages, often described as fish-like or amphibious, appear after the flood, carrying wisdom to rebuild. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu play the same role, sages who emerge from the waters to teach writing, agriculture, and ritual. In India, the Rishis survive a flood and transmit the sacred hymns of the Vedas. Across the ocean, in Mesoamerica, Viracocha strides across the Andes after the waters recede, shaping humanity anew. Always there are 7, or 1, or a handful, chosen to preserve what would otherwise be lost. Always there is the suggestion that humanity does not start from nothing, but from fragments of a greater age that came before. It is tempting to see these tales as metaphors for resilience, the ability of people to survive disaster and rebuild. But the details are too strange to dismiss. Why do so many cultures describe beings who are not quite human? Sages with shimmering skin, teachers who arrive from the sea, figures who glow with the light of the stars. Why are they always depicted as outsiders, as if they do not belong to the world they enter? The Dogon people of West Africa, for instance, tell of amphibious beings called the Nomo, who came from the sky to restore order after chaos. They are said to have given the Dogon detailed astronomical knowledge, including facts about the star Sirius that modern science only confirmed with telescopes. How could such details be imagined unless they were fragments of something remembered? The theme of forbidden knowledge also survives the flood. In Genesis, Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge and are cast out, their eyes opened to truths they were not ready to bear. In Enoch's visions, the Watchers teach humanity writing, metallurgy, and enchantments, skills that both elevate and corrupt. In Greek myth, Prometheus steals fire from Olympus to give to man, punished for delivering what the gods had withheld. In every culture, there is a moment when knowledge leaps forward, abruptly, almost unnaturally, and is remembered not as invention, but as a gift or a theft from powers beyond. The flood, then, is both punishment and reset, a way of limiting what humanity can handle, even as fragments of that forbidden wisdom slip through. In ruins scattered across the earth, the fingerprints of such fragments remain. Megalithic structures aligned to solstices and stars, constructed with precision we still marvel at. Artifacts that hint at technologies ahead of their time. Myths that describe machines of flight, weapons of fire, and journeys to the heavens. Each may be explained individually as coincidence, imagination, or ingenuity. But taken together, they form a chorus, an echo of something greater. Could it be that our ancestors were not alone, that in the murmur of myths about gods, giants, and sages, they were recording encounters with beings who shaped the course of history? The flood, in this light, becomes not the end but the veil, a curtain drawn over a chapter of humanity's story too strange, too dangerous, or too precious to be carried forward intact. What survived came in the form of whispers, tales of giants who once walked the earth, of sages who rose from the waters, of knowledge brought down from the stars. And though these whispers are scattered across languages and continents, they all tell us the same thing. The world before the flood was not like the world we know. After the flood, the world did not return to silence. Instead, it was reborn, seeded with fragments of knowledge and myth that pointed back to what had been lost. Civilizations that appeared in the millennia that followed did so with a sudden brilliance, as though they were drawing upon memories older than themselves. In the valleys of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians rose, building cities with temples that pierced the sky, mapping the heavens with astonishing accuracy, and inscribing their laws on clay tablets. Their achievements seemed to arrive fully formed: writing, irrigation, astronomy, mathematics. Historians call it the dawn of civilization, but even within their own records, the Sumerians insisted that they had been taught by the gods, by the Anunnaki, those who came down from the heavens. These gods were not mere symbols. The Sumerian tablets list their names, their domains, and even their rivalries. They describe Enki, the wise and cunning bringer of knowledge, and Enlil, stern and wrathful, determined to maintain divine order. It was said that when the Anunnaki first came to Earth, they sought gold, a substance they prized not as adornment, but as something essential to their survival. Ancient texts speak of them mining, commanding others to labor, until rebellion broke out among their ranks. To solve this crisis, Enki proposed the creation of a new race, workers fashioned from clay but enlivened by the essence of the gods themselves. These beings were not entirely divine, nor entirely animal. They were human. The tale is astonishing in its implications. The idea that humanity was not the product of chance evolution, but a hybrid designed for service, is woven through the earliest myths. The word Adamu appears in Sumerian records, the first man created to toil for the gods. Compare this with the biblical Adam, formed from dust and given life by divine breath. Two stories, from two cultures, with uncanny similarities. If one is myth, why not the other? And if both carry fragments of the same older memory, what does that say about us? Archaeological discoveries add texture to the legend. In southern Iraq, the ruins of Eridu, the first city according to Sumerian tradition, reveal a settlement that grew with extraordinary speed. Layer after layer of temples built atop each other show continuity, stretching back nearly 7,000 years. The Sumerians claimed Eridu was founded by the gods themselves, with Enki as its patron. Could this be the place where the first experiments in humanity were said to have taken place? The tablets also speak of beings called the Igigi, described as laborers for the Anunnaki. They rebelled against their masters after centuries of toil, refusing to continue digging for gold. Their revolt is eerily similar to later myths of angels rebelling in heaven, cast down for their defiance. To resolve the crisis, humanity was created as the replacement. Was this metaphor for social upheaval, or does it reflect a deeper truth, that another race once existed, subordinate to greater beings, erased when humans took their place? Even more unsettling are the descriptions of the Anunnaki themselves. They were said to be taller than humans, radiant, long-lived, their lifespans stretching into thousands of years. In depictions carved into stone, they appear with wings or carrying strange objects, sometimes standing before what looks like the tree of life. Some hold devices resembling watches, their wrists adorned with objects that seem out of place in an age before metal tools. To us, they are symbols. To the Sumerians, they were reality, and from them, kingship descended. The Sumerian king list begins with rulers whose reigns lasted tens of thousands of years, only shortening after the flood. To mainstream historians, these are exaggerations. To those who read myth as memory, they may be echoes of a time when gods and men shared the same world. The story does not remain in Mesopotamia. Traces ripple outward. The Egyptians spoke of gods who reigned before the pharaohs. The Hindus tell of the Devas and Asuras, celestial beings locked in struggle whose knowledge was given to mortals. The Mesoamerican myths recall Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought law and learning. Each tradition insists that what we call civilization was not invented, but bestowed. Always there is the sense of something handed down, something older, something other. And then there is Nibiru, the mysterious planet said by some interpreters of Sumerian text to be the home of the Anunnaki, a wandering world with a vast orbit of 3,600 years. Whether this was truly what the Sumerians believed, or a modern overlay on their words, it adds to the aura of mystery. Nibiru is described as once green and beautiful, but later desolate, its atmosphere failing, driving its inhabitants to seek resources elsewhere. The need for gold, so unusual for mythology, makes sense in this context. Today, science acknowledges that gold particles can protect against radiation, used even in space technology. Could the myths be remembering not superstition, but practical knowledge, misunderstood through the lens of ancient scribes? The legacy of the Anunnaki, if we believe the stories, did not end when they left. Before departing, they established dynasties, choosing kings to rule as their representatives, sometimes even enhancing bloodlines with their own essence. The idea of divine right to rule, so central to monarchy throughout history, may trace back to this claim, that certain families carried the blood of gods. The Sumerians believed their kings were intermediaries, tasked with maintaining the bond between heaven and earth. Later, pharaohs of Egypt claimed descent from Ra. The emperors of China called themselves sons of heaven. The pattern is universal, as if across the world rulers echoed the same ancient truth, that power descended from beyond the human. When we stand before the ruins of Uruk, of Ur, of Babylon, it is tempting to see them as merely human achievements. Yet the myths insist otherwise. They say these were the afterglow of an older light, flickers of knowledge that survived the flood, carried by the Anunnaki, and preserved by kings. Perhaps that is why even today we marvel at how sudden, how brilliant the rise of these civilizations was. Perhaps we are not looking at beginnings at all, but at re-beginnings, civilizations reborn from the ashes of something greater. As the Sumerians flourished, their stories spread outward, carried into the mythologies of later peoples who reshaped the names, but not the essence of the tale. Babylon inherited the mantle, and with it came epics that blended memory with warning. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation story, speaks of gods descending from the heavens, battling among themselves, and leaving mankind to serve as caretakers of the earth. In these lines, humanity is again depicted not as an independent creation, but as the byproduct of struggles among greater beings. And always, beneath the surface, lies the suggestion that knowledge and kingship are not organic, but imported. The Babylonians preserved an especially vivid account of the flood, older than Genesis, yet strikingly familiar. In the Atrahasis epic, the gods grow weary of humanity's noise and rebellion. They send plague, famine, and finally water to silence the world. But one man, Atrahasis, is warned by the god Enki to build a vessel and preserve life. He survives, and when the waters subside, offers sacrifice in thanks. The gods, smelling the offering, regret their destruction and promise never to repeat it. How curious that the story mirrors the biblical flood almost detail for detail. Is this simple borrowing, or are both retelling a memory already ancient even then? These Mesopotamian texts are not silent on the watchers either, though they use different language. The Apkallu, half-divine sages, often depicted with wings or cloaked in fish-like garments, are said to have descended from the heavens or the sea, teaching humanity arts and sciences. 7 in number, they appear again and again in inscriptions, guardians of sacred knowledge who existed before the flood. After the deluge, new sages arise, but they are mortal, their wisdom less complete. The pattern is clear. Divine knowledge flourished in the age before the flood, but in its aftermath only fragments survived, carried forward by human hands. Curiously, the Apkallu resemble other 7 sages traditions scattered around the world. In India, the Saptarishi, 7 rishis, are remembered as companions of Manu, the survivor of the flood, who helped reshape the world. In Greece, 7 wise men are credited with establishing the foundation of philosophy and law. Even in Egypt, after Zep Tepi, 7 figures appear as bringers of stability and wisdom. Why this number? Why this role? Was it coincidence, or does it echo some ancient archetype, a group of survivors, perhaps not fully human, carrying remnants of lost civilization into the new age? The Babylonians also preserved the myth of Oannes, a strange being said to have emerged from the Persian Gulf. He was half man, half fish, his face human, but his body scaled, cloaked in fins. Each day he would leave the sea to teach humanity writing, architecture, and agriculture, returning to the waters at night. The historian Berosus, writing in the 3rd century BCE, recorded that Oannes was the first of several such beings who appeared after the flood. To us, it sounds fantastical, but the pattern is familiar. Teachers from elsewhere arriving suddenly, imparting knowledge beyond the capacity of their time. Whether cloaked in feathers, scales, or light, they serve the same role: the transmitters of civilization. Skeptics argue that such stories reflect the human tendency to explain sudden leaps of progress by attributing them to external forces. But why then do these forces always come from the sea, the stars, or the heavens, never from neighboring tribes or rival villages? Why do cultures that never touched each other tell of beings who shine, who tower, who emerge after disaster to restore order? It is as though the memory of a lost world is hardwired into our collective imagination, surfacing again and again like a dream we cannot shake. The ruins of Babylon remind us that even glory fades. The ziggurat of Etemenanki, thought to inspire the biblical Tower of Babel, rose in terraces toward the sky, a physical attempt to bridge heaven and earth. But in the story, humanity's ambition angers the divine, who confuses their language and scatters them. The tale may be an allegory of pride, but it may also conceal something more: a memory of human attempts to replicate the structures of the gods, punished for reaching beyond their station. Once again, the theme recurs: knowledge granted, knowledge abused, punishment delivered, survival ensured only for a remnant. In the quiet ruins of Mesopotamia, the voices of these myths still echo. They remind us that the story of civilization is not straightforward progress, but a cycle of rise, fall, and rebirth. They suggest that what we call the dawn of history may in fact be a rebirth after catastrophe, a continuation of knowledge too strange and too old to fully grasp. And as we listen, we begin to wonder, what if the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the Apkallu, and Oannes are all names for the same thing, beings who walked the earth before us, whose traces remain in the myths of every land. If so, their story is not only the story of gods and giants, but the story of us, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to see. To understand how deeply these echoes reached, we must look beyond Mesopotamia and Egypt into the sacred texts and myths that shaped entire civilizations. In the Hebrew tradition, fragments of the Book of Enoch survive alongside canonical scripture, leaving faint outlines of a larger, more unsettling story. Genesis itself contains a brief but provocative line. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. Scholars debate whether this was meant literally or symbolically, but within the Book of Enoch the passage is given flesh, describing in detail the watchers who descended and the Nephilim they left behind. It is striking that such a small verse would open a door onto an entire hidden cosmology, as if the Bible were offering a glimpse of a truth too controversial to state outright. The decision to exclude the Book of Enoch from the biblical canon remains one of history's quiet mysteries. Early Christians, including influential church fathers, cited it freely. It was read in synagogues, copied, and revered. Yet by the 4th century, it vanished from most traditions, preserved only in the Ethiopian church. Why? Was it because its stories were too fantastic, painting angels not as pure messengers of God, but as rebels who mingled with humans? Or was it because its vision of cosmic order conflicted with the tidy hierarchies later religions sought to enforce? To strip away the Nephilim, the Watchers, and the vision of knowledge granted from above was to leave humanity alone, shaped only by divine will and human effort. Perhaps that simplicity was safer than the alternative. Even so, fragments of Enochian imagery persisted. The story of the flood in Genesis still recalls the cleansing of corruption, echoing the catastrophe described in Enoch. The angels who rebel in later Christian tradition, led by Lucifer, reflect the earlier watchers who broke their oath. The giants defeated by Israel in the conquest of Canaan mirror the Nephilim who once devoured the earth. In this way, the shadows of Enoch remained, faint but undeniable, hidden within the very text that tried to forget them. What makes this more compelling is that other cultures tell near-identical stories. In Greece, Zeus wages war against the Titans, who are said to be born of heaven and earth, beings too unruly to remain. The Titans are cast into Tartarus, a prison beneath the world, echoing Enoch's tale of the Watchers bound in darkness until judgment. In Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann fight the monstrous Fomorians, driving them into the sea, just as the Nephilim are swept away by the flood. In Norse myth, Odin and his brothers slay the giant Ymir, his blood flooding the world, from which new order arises. Always the pattern repeats: rebellion, hybrids, catastrophe, rebirth. Even in the Americas, where contact with Eurasia came millennia later, the echoes remain. The Maya and Aztec traditions recall races of giants who built great cities before being destroyed. In Peru, the Incas told of Viracocha, who first created giants but destroyed them with a flood when they grew violent. In each case, giants are both creators and destroyers, symbols of a power too great to coexist with ordinary humans. And in each case, their end is tied to water, a deluge, a cleansing, a final act of judgment. The persistence of these themes suggests more than coincidence. It suggests that humanity carried forward a memory older than its divisions, a memory rooted in something all our ancestors experienced or were told. Imagine the trauma of watching towering beings stride across the land, consuming resources, warring with one another, and finally vanishing in catastrophe. Such an event would sear itself into story, retold to children and grandchildren until it hardened into myth. Even as centuries passed and details blurred, the core truth remained. There were giants once, and they were swept away. Yet there is another possibility, one whispered in the Book of Enoch itself. Not all were destroyed. The text hints that the spirits of the Nephilim, after their bodies perished, became wandering presences, shadows that plagued mankind as demons. Other traditions speak of survivors, scattered and hidden. In Genesis, when Israel spies out Canaan, they report seeing the Anakim, descendants of the giants, still inhabiting the land. Could it be that the flood did not erase them completely, but only diminished their number? If so, where did they go? Into the mountains, beneath the earth, into the seas? Legends across the world tell of hidden races, living apart from humanity, yet intruding at times. The Irish spoke of the Fomorians dwelling in remote isles, the Norse of Jotnar in frozen wastes, the Greeks of Titans chained below. Even modern folklore whispers of wild men, trolls, or ogres haunting the margins of civilization. Could these be distorted memories of survivors, whittled down through time but never entirely gone? In this light, the flood becomes not only a judgment but a transition, a threshold between the world of giants and gods and the world of men. On one side, a time when divine beings mingled freely with mortals, their offspring ruling with terror or splendor. On the other, a world where such beings became legend, their remnants hidden, their influence lingering only in the faintest of echoes. Humanity stepped into its own age, but not without shadows from the one before. And so the Book of Enoch, excluded and forgotten, continues to whisper a dangerous idea, that our beginnings are not simple, that our world was once shared with beings who blurred the boundary between earth and heaven. Whether these were gods, angels, or something stranger still, their memory has shaped the myths of every culture. To listen to those myths is to glimpse a past that refuses to die, a story that haunts us from beneath the surface of history. As we move deeper into these intertwined traditions, one figure begins to loom larger than all the rest: Enoch himself. Unlike most patriarchs of Scripture, Enoch is remembered not for conquests or progeny, but for his journey between realms. Genesis gives him only a fleeting mention. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. But in the apocryphal books, he becomes the central character of an extraordinary saga, one that transforms him from man into messenger, from scribe of earth to herald of the heavens. His tale suggests that hidden within the earliest chapters of history was not merely survival, but the transmission of secrets too great to perish with the flood. In the Book of Enoch, the patriarch is carried aloft in visions, shown the mechanisms of the cosmos, the courses of the stars, the storehouses of winds, the chambers of thunder and lightning. These descriptions read almost like scientific observations cloaked in the language of myth, as if the text is struggling to translate what was truly seen into words a shepherd could understand. Enoch is guided by angels through heavenly halls, past crystalline walls that glow with fire, across rivers of light that bend like molten glass. At times, it reads more like an account of interstellar travel than spiritual allegory. Was this poetry, or was it testimony? The parallels to other ancient figures are striking. In Egypt, Thoth was said to master the measurements of the heavens, the keeper of time and wisdom. In Greece, Hermes was the messenger who moved freely between worlds, guiding souls from life into death. In Arab traditions, Idris is the sage lifted bodily into the heavens, his knowledge preserved for future generations. Scholars have long noticed the resemblance, but what if these are not coincidences? What if they are all different names for the same figure, remembered differently as cultures fractured and scattered? Enoch, Thoth, Hermes, Idris, one archetype, one man, one memory of the bridge between earth and sky. Enoch's most crucial role was as the intermediary between humanity and the Watchers. When the angels descended, they swore an oath on Mount Hermon, a pact that bound them together in their defiance. They taught forbidden arts, metallurgy, enchantments, astronomy, even the art of war. Humanity advanced, but in a distorted way, knowledge twisted into violence. Enoch is sent to petition on their behalf, to plead with the divine for mercy. But his intercession fails. The judgment is set. The Watchers are bound in darkness, their offspring destroyed, the world cleansed by flood. Yet it is Enoch, the human caught between, who preserves the record of these events. Without him, their memory might have vanished entirely. It is not difficult to see why later authorities suppressed his writings. To acknowledge them is to admit that the world we know is only half the story, that our origins are tied to beings whose existence shatters the neat divide between divine and mortal. It is also to admit that knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, may not have been slowly discovered, but abruptly given, and then violently withdrawn. Such an idea destabilizes the linear narrative of progress on which so much of history is built. To restore Enoch is to reintroduce uncertainty. But perhaps that uncertainty is precisely what makes him so compelling. The image of a man taken alive into heaven is not one of destruction, but of preservation. It suggests that humanity itself, or at least some chosen part of it, was considered worth saving. Not just through Noah's survival of the flood, but through Enoch's survival of knowledge. In this way, Enoch becomes a symbol of continuity. He bridges the age of giants and gods with the age of men, carrying fragments of wisdom across the divide. Echoes of this idea ripple outward. In Hindu lore, Vyasa is said to have dictated the Vedas, knowledge from the gods preserved in human memory. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl disappears across the sea, promising to return with wisdom. In Celtic tradition, Merlin vanishes into the forest, neither dead nor alive, his knowledge stored until the world needs it again. Always there is the figure of the sage who does not die, who lingers at the edge of memory, a promise that what was lost might one day return. What if Enoch is not just a character in a forgotten text, but a cipher for something greater, a reminder that human history has layers, that wisdom has been gained and lost many times, and that behind the myths of angels, gods, and sages lies the same truth. A truth that the earth once held more than humanity alone. The night sky above us still turns with precision. The same stars that Enoch once described, the same constellations the Sumerians charted, the same heavens that guided Egyptian priests and Babylonian astronomers. To look up at them is to feel the weight of continuity, as though the cosmos itself has kept faith with a memory we have forgotten. Enoch's story reminds us that history is not linear but cyclical, that behind each beginning lies another, hidden in shadow, waiting to be uncovered. If Enoch represents continuity, then the flood represents fracture, the tearing apart of one world to make way for another. But what truly lies on the other side of that fracture? When the waters receded, humanity did not simply return to wandering tribes. Instead, across the globe, we see the sudden flowering of civilizations, as if seeds preserved through the deluge had been planted in fertile soil. It is in this period, often dated to around 10,000 years ago, that the first monumental structures begin to appear. They rise not as simple huts or scattered villages, but as vast complexes aligned with the stars, suggesting that survivors carried forward a knowledge far older than the age into which they were born. Consider Gobekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Buried for millennia and only uncovered in the 1990s, it is a series of massive stone circles, carved pillars adorned with animals, symbols, and abstract designs. Archaeologists date it to nearly 12,000 years ago, thousands of years before the pyramids, before Mesopotamia, before writing. Officially, it was built by hunter-gatherers just emerging from the Ice Age. Yet the complexity of its design, the precision of its carvings, and the scale of its construction seem far beyond what such societies were thought capable of. Who taught them to build this way? Why were the stones aligned with celestial events, suggesting astronomical knowledge at a time when humanity was supposedly primitive? The mystery deepens when we notice what happened next. After centuries of use, Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried, as if its builders sought to hide it. Why would a culture that labored to raise such a monument suddenly choose to entomb it beneath the earth? Was it a ritual closure or an attempt to preserve something from a coming disaster? To this day, the site defies easy explanation, a riddle standing at the threshold of history. Across the seas, similar anomalies emerge. In South America, at sites like Puma Punku in Bolivia, massive stone blocks lie scattered, carved with precision that suggests tools more advanced than hammer and chisel. Some fit together with joints so exact that a sheet of paper cannot slip between them, despite being cut from stone harder than granite. Local myths attribute the construction to Viracocha, a god who appeared after a great flood, tall, bearded, and cloaked in white, who taught people arts and laws before vanishing across the sea. Was Viracocha another name for the sages, the Apkallu, the watchers remembered in a different land? In Egypt, the rise of monumental architecture is equally abrupt. The step pyramid of Djoser, designed by the enigmatic figure Imhotep, appears as if from nowhere, suddenly elevating stone construction to a level of mastery. Within a few centuries, the Great Pyramid is raised, aligned so perfectly with the cardinal points and celestial bodies that even modern engineers marvel at the feat. If we believe the traditional account, this was the work of farmers using copper tools and sledges. But the myths tell another story, that the pyramids were not tombs, but repositories of knowledge, built to preserve wisdom from the first time, Zep Tepi, when gods walked the earth. The recurrence of flood myths and sudden architectural brilliance is too consistent to ignore. In Mesopotamia, temples called ziggurats rise skyward, echoing the Tower of Babel, as if reaching for the heavens once lost. In India, ancient texts describe Vimanas, flying palaces and machines of war that existed in a forgotten age before the flood of Manu. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec civilization emerges seemingly without precedent, carving colossal heads that gaze out with enigmatic expressions, their scale suggesting memories of larger-than-life rulers. Everywhere we look, the same pattern appears: catastrophe, survival, rebirth, and the sudden arrival of knowledge beyond what we expect for its time. Could it be that what we call myth is the encoded memory of an earlier civilization erased by water and time? A civilization that understood astronomy, engineering, perhaps even technologies we cannot yet imagine? If so, then the flood was not merely a punishment, but an erasure, wiping away not only people but the evidence of their works. Only scattered fragments remained, ruins buried, myths told, knowledge preserved in symbols and stories until humanity was ready to rediscover them. The implication is unsettling. What if history is not a steady climb, but a cycle of rise and fall, each age inheriting the broken remnants of the one before? The flood, then, was the dividing line between one cycle and the next, a scar across the memory of humanity that we still carry in story and stone. To listen to those stories is to glimpse the possibility that we are not the first, nor will we be the last, to walk this earth in search of knowledge. And in that thought lies a haunting question. If our world were to fall tomorrow, drowned in fire or water, what fragments would survive for the next cycle to find? Would they look upon our skyscrapers, our satellites, our shattered cities, and call them the works of gods? Would they remember us as giants, or as whispers in the dark, erased by a flood of our own making? If the monuments of Gobekli Tepe, Puma Punku, and Giza are fragments of knowledge that survived the flood, then the myths of sages who appeared afterward are the threads that tie them together. Again and again, cultures across the earth insist that humanity was not left alone to rebuild in ignorance. Teachers came, sometimes described as gods, sometimes as men, sometimes as something in between. Their arrival is always sudden, their wisdom always vast, and their departure always mysterious. Among the Babylonians, as we saw, these figures were the Apkallu, 7 sages cloaked in wings or fish skins, who emerged from the waters to teach humanity the skills of civilization. In India, the Saptarishi, 7 wise men, are remembered as guiding figures who preserved sacred hymns through the flood of Manu and passed them to humanity in the New Age. In Egypt, myths speak of Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of the gods, bringing writing and law to a world reshaped by chaos. In Greece, the 7 sages are credited with shaping philosophy and governance, their wisdom laying the groundwork for what we call classical civilization. Why always 7? Why always after a flood or collapse? The parallels suggest more than coincidence. They suggest a single memory scattered into many forms. The Dogon of Mali preserve one of the most puzzling accounts of all. Their traditions speak of the Nomo, amphibious beings who descended from the sky in a vessel that spun and roared like fire. They taught the Dogon agriculture, weaving, and astronomy. Most strikingly, they told of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. The Dogon described not only Sirius itself, but a companion star invisible to the naked eye, moving in a long orbit around it. Modern astronomy confirmed this only in the 19th century with powerful telescopes. How could an isolated African people possess such knowledge centuries earlier? Scholars debate, but the Dogon insist it was given to them by the Nomo, the same kind of teacher figures who appear in every other culture. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, arrives after catastrophe to teach the arts of civilization. He is depicted as a bringer of corn, law, and astronomy, a being both man and divine who eventually departs across the ocean promising to return. The parallels to Viracocha in the Andes are uncanny. Another tall, bearded figure who appears after a flood, imparts knowledge, and disappears into the sea. Even across the Pacific, Polynesian traditions recall great navigators or godlike teachers who emerged from the waters with wisdom unknown before. Could it be that these are all variations of the same phenomenon? Survivors of a lost civilization, perhaps, who traveled across the world in the aftermath of disaster, planting seeds of knowledge among scattered tribes, or beings not of this world at all, descending when humanity was most vulnerable to shape its path? Either way, the consistency is unnerving. Cultures that had no contact, separated by oceans and millennia, all insist on the same theme. We were not alone in the rebirth. The symbolism of these sages often includes objects that sound strange to modern ears, tablets of stone or emerald inscribed with cosmic law, staffs or rods that control thunder and lightning, vessels that fly, glow, or roar like fire. To their contemporaries, these were miracles. To us, they sound uncannily like technology, tools or devices interpreted through the lens of myth. Just as a medieval villager would describe a modern airplane as a great metal bird, so too might ancient peoples have described advanced objects in the only language they had. If this is true, then myth preserves not only memory, but distorted descriptions of real encounters. Even the biblical narrative fits this pattern. After the flood, Noah is described as planting vineyards, building cities, establishing laws. His descendants spread across the earth, carrying with them fragments of the world before. Some traditions even suggest Noah himself was taught by Enoch, that his survival was not only physical, but intellectual, entrusted with knowledge meant to endure through the catastrophe. If so, then the biblical patriarchs stand in the same line as the sages of every culture, guardians of memory, transmitters of knowledge. What makes this idea compelling is the speed with which civilization re-emerged. By 3000 BCE, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China all displayed complex societies, writing, monumental architecture, and astronomy. Historians call this a Neolithic revolution. But revolutions are rarely so sudden or so widespread. Could it be that what we call invention was in fact remembrance, the reactivation of knowledge seeded by those who survived or descended after the flood? If this is true, then humanity is living not its first story but its second, or perhaps its third or fourth. Each cycle ends in disaster, but not all is lost. Fragments endure, carried by sages, preserved in stone, remembered in myth. Each time we rebuild, never quite knowing how much of what we call progress is truly ours, and how much is inheritance from those who came before. When night falls and the stars emerge, it is easy to imagine those ancient teachers watching the same sky, pointing to constellations, telling stories that carried both memory and warning. Their voices may be faint now, scattered across cultures and languages, but they converge on a single truth. Humanity has been guided, shaped, and perhaps even created by forces beyond itself. The question that lingers is not whether these forces existed, but who, or what, they truly were. If the sages who appeared after the flood were guardians of memory, then the monuments they inspired were anchors, physical reminders of truths too great to entrust to words alone. Across continents, these monuments stand, silent yet enduring, as if they were meant to carry forward something essential through the erosion of time. We marvel at them for their scale, but perhaps their true purpose was not size, but survival. To outlast floods, wars, and forgetfulness. The Great Pyramid of Giza remains the most iconic example. Rising with uncanny precision, its base aligned to true north with an accuracy that even modern engineers struggle to achieve, it seems less like a tomb and more like a machine of stone. Its internal chambers, shafts angled toward specific stars, suggest an astronomical function, a message written not in words but in geometry. Ancient legends claim it was built not by slaves under Pharaoh Khufu, but by sages of the first time, preserving wisdom against a coming deluge. Some Arab chroniclers even named Enoch, whom they called Idris, as the builder, storing within it the sciences of heaven and earth. Could it be that the Great Pyramid is less a burial site and more a time capsule from a world before? Similar mysteries confront us in South America. At Sacsayhuaman, above Cusco, massive stone walls fit together with such precision that even today a knife blade cannot pass between them. The stones are irregular, interlocking like pieces of a puzzle, some weighing over 200 tons. Local myth insists they were placed by giants or by Viracocha's servants after the flood. At Puma Punku, stone blocks bear cuts and drill holes so exact they resemble modern machining. Official archaeology attributes these to hammer and chisel, but the scale and accuracy strain belief. Why did cultures without the wheel or iron tools achieve such feats? And why do their myths insist the builders were beings from before? In Easter Island, the Moai statues stare inland with solemn eyes, their backs to the sea. The Rapa Nui people say they represent ancestors who once walked as giants, carrying mana, a force of power and knowledge. Some Moai are over 30 feet tall, weighing more than 80 tons, carved from volcanic rock and transported miles. How they were moved remains contested. Were they walked upright with ropes, as some experiments suggest? Or was there another means, now forgotten? And why do they so strongly resemble the colossal statues of Tiahuanaco and the stylized figures of ancient Mesopotamia? Coincidence or evidence of a shared legacy? Even under the oceans, whispers of lost worlds emerge. Off the coast of Japan, at Yonaguni, divers discovered a massive submerged structure of terraces, steps, and platforms. Some argue it is natural, others that it is the ruins of a city drowned when sea levels rose after the Ice Age. If the latter, then it suggests that sophisticated societies existed far earlier than we admit, societies erased when the waters came. Plato's tale of Atlantis, a great civilization swallowed by the sea, may not have been invention, but memory. He claimed his account came from Egyptian priests, who spoke of a land beyond the Pillars of Hercules destroyed in a single day and night. Too many cultures remember lost cities beneath the waves for it to be dismissed outright. What unites these sites is not only their mystery, but their orientation toward the heavens. Gobekli Tepe aligns with the rising of Sirius, the same star sacred to the Egyptians and inexplicably known to the Dogon. Stonehenge marks solstices, echoing temples in Egypt and ziggurats in Mesopotamia. The pyramids of Teotihuacan align with Orion's belt, just as those at Giza do. Across time and oceans, the same constellations appear, as though the builders were following a single cosmic blueprint. Did the sages after the flood carry not only knowledge of survival, but maps of the sky, ensuring humanity would remember its place in the cosmos? Skeptics insist these alignments are coincidence, the result of countless monuments with a few falling into pattern. Yet the consistency is striking. Why Orion? Why Sirius? Why the solstices, repeated again and again? To the ancients, the sky was more than navigation. It was memory, permanence, the realm of the gods. To encode their monuments with celestial markers was to tie earth to heaven, to remind future generations that what was above once walked below. If so, then these monuments are not simply ruins, but messages. They tell us, look up, remember, do not forget. They remind us that we are heirs to a knowledge larger than ourselves, a knowledge passed down through catastrophe, hidden in stone when it could not be written. And though we may not fully understand their purpose, their endurance across millennia ensures that the question cannot be silenced. Who built them? Why? And what truth were they so desperate to preserve? To walk among these ruins is to feel the weight of something older than history. Each block of stone, each shaft of light aligned with the stars, whispers that humanity's story is far longer, stranger, and more entangled with the heavens than we allow ourselves to believe. The sages may be gone, the giants drowned, but their fingerprints remain, etched into the very bones of the earth. If the ruins and monuments are the fingerprints of forgotten ages, then the myths are their voice, carried across generations in the form of stories that seem fantastical yet stubbornly consistent. One of the most universal of these stories is the war between gods and giants, a cosmic struggle that reshaped the world and decided the fate of humanity. In every corner of the earth, people recall a time when forces larger than life clashed, leaving scars that endure in both landscape and memory. The Greeks spoke of the Gigantomachy, the great battle between the Olympian gods and the giants, offspring of Gaia and Uranus. Towering and violent, the giants sought to overthrow the gods but were struck down, buried beneath mountains. Volcanoes and earthquakes, the myths say, are their restless bodies struggling to break free. In Norse myth, the Aesir fought the Jotnar, frost giants born from Ymir, the primordial being whose body became the earth itself. The war never truly ended. Ragnarok, the final battle, was destined to pit gods and giants once more, ending the cycle of the world. In the Hebrew tradition, the struggle took another form. The Nephilim, offspring of the Watchers, brought chaos and violence until the flood destroyed them. Yet later, the Israelites still encountered remnants: the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Zamzumim. These names, scattered through Scripture, suggest a memory of real battles against tribes remembered for their size and strength. David's slaying of Goliath becomes part of this pattern. A mortal confronting a giant, symbolizing humanity's assertion of dominance in a world once overshadowed by larger beings. Even across the Atlantic, the echoes remain. The Inca spoke of giants who arrived on their shores, consuming everything until Viracocha destroyed them with fire from heaven. The Aztecs told of earlier suns, or ages, one of which ended when giants roamed the earth and were wiped out by catastrophe. In North America, native tribes remembered tall, red-haired warriors who lived in caves and fought against their ancestors. Bones and skulls of unusual size were sometimes shown as proof, though most vanished into obscurity. What is striking is not only that these myths exist, but that they all tie giants to upheaval, war, and destruction. They are never gentle guardians or wise rulers. They are beings of appetite and violence whose presence destabilizes the world. Their downfall is always necessary for humanity to flourish. This consistency suggests they may not be purely symbolic. If they were, surely some cultures would have cast them as noble or benevolent. Instead, nearly all portray them as a scourge, too strong, too dangerous, too alien to remain. Yet in their destruction lies creation. In Norse myth, Ymir's death births the world. In Greek myth, the Titan's fall gives rise to the reign of Zeus and the Olympians. In the Hebrew story, the flood that drowns the Nephilim makes way for Noah and the new covenant. Always, the end of the giants marks the beginning of humanity's true age. This may be more than allegory. It may be the echo of a transition, when beings larger, older, or more powerful than humans were finally removed, leaving the earth to us alone. But myths also hint that the removal was not total. Some giants were said to survive in hidden places, beneath mountains, within seas, on remote islands. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and storms were interpreted as their lingering struggles. Even today, folklore in remote regions speaks of enormous figures glimpsed in the wilderness. Whether trolls in Scandinavia, ogres in European tales, or the Bigfoot of North America, these legends may be the faintest echoes of a once common memory, that giants were real, and some may have endured. What if the wars between gods and giants were not purely myth, but distorted memories of real conflicts? Perhaps they were wars between different factions of the Watchers and their offspring, battles fought with weapons and knowledge long lost. Ancient texts often describe weapons of fire from the sky, thunder that split mountains, floods unleashed as punishment. These could be poetic descriptions, or they could be recollections of technologies beyond our current imagination. If so, then humanity may have been caught in the crossfire of battles between beings far greater than ourselves, surviving only because the world that birthed them collapsed. The landscapes themselves seem to bear witness. In the Mediterranean, entire islands bear names tied to battles of gods and giants. In the Andes, mountains are said to be petrified remains of ancient beings. In North America, giant bones have been reported in mounds that dot the land, their origin unexplained. Everywhere, geography and myth intertwine, as though the earth itself is the battlefield where these clashes once raged. To consider this possibility is to see myth in a new light, no longer as pure imagination, but as distorted history, accounts passed down orally until memory blurred into symbol. The battles of gods and giants may not have happened exactly as told, but perhaps something like them did. A world in which beings of immense size and power were brought low, leaving humanity to inherit the ashes. And so we find ourselves heirs not only to the wisdom of the sages, but also to the ruins of a war that shaped the world before ours. The giants may be gone, but their shadow lingers in story, in stone, and perhaps in the very ground beneath our feet. The theme of war between gods and giants leads naturally into another question. What kind of knowledge was at stake in these conflicts, and why was it so dangerous? The Book of Enoch suggests that when the Watchers descended, they did not only take wives and father children, they also revealed secrets. Azazel, one of their leaders, is said to have taught men the art of making swords, shields, and armor. Others instructed humanity in the use of cosmetics, enchantments, astronomy, and metalworking. These gifts advanced humanity, but they also corrupted it, pushing people toward vanity, violence, and sorcery. Knowledge, in this telling, is double-edged. It can elevate, but it can also destroy. The story mirrors countless myths around the world where forbidden knowledge is given or stolen. In Greek tradition, Prometheus defies Zeus to give fire to mankind, a gift that transforms society but brings endless punishment. In Mesopotamia, Enki warns Atrahasis of the flood, betraying the will of the other gods to preserve humanity. In Genesis, the serpent tempts Eve to eat the fruit of knowledge, opening human eyes, but also bringing exile. The pattern repeats: humanity receives wisdom, but at a price. Too much knowledge, too soon, disrupts cosmic balance. Why would ancient peoples frame knowledge this way? Perhaps because they sensed that their leaps in advancement were not gradual, but abrupt. Archaeology shows that the Neolithic Revolution, farming, domestication, urban life, emerged almost suddenly in multiple parts of the world. Writing, too, appears nearly fully formed in Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, not as clumsy scribbles evolving into letters, but as complex systems tied to astronomy and ritual. To the ancients, it may have seemed that such skills arrived from outside, bestowed rather than invented. Myths of gods or watchers teaching humanity may be how they explained those sudden transformations. Even the arts of war carry this pattern. The sudden shift from stone to bronze, and later to iron, came with such dramatic upheavals that entire ages are named after these metals. Civilizations rose and fell on the basis of weaponry, and in myth, these transitions are often tied to divine intervention. The Greeks spoke of successive ages, of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each decline linked to the misuse of knowledge. Hesiod described the men of the Bronze Age as violent and warlike, destroyed by their own strength. The echo of Enoch's Nephilim is clear: beings armed with forbidden knowledge who bring devastation. There are also darker hints of technologies more advanced than we admit. Ancient Indian texts like the Mahabharata describe Vimanas, flying machines that carried warriors into the sky, weapons that shone like the sun, and leveled cities with fire. Scholars read these as metaphor, yet the descriptions are hauntingly specific: chariots that roar like thunder, weapons that leave fields barren, blasts that blind and burn. Could these be distorted memories of real devices, remnants of a forgotten age of knowledge misused? The flood, then, becomes not only a punishment for moral corruption, but a desperate reset, wiping away technologies too dangerous for survival. Even architecture reflects this tension. The megalithic stones of Baalbek, the precision of Machu Picchu, the geometry of Giza, each seems to speak of knowledge beyond the time that produced them. If these were indeed inheritances from an earlier age, then perhaps their builders were preserving what they could before catastrophe returned? Why align temples with stars if not to mark time, to signal when cycles might repeat? Why encode mathematics in stone unless you feared paper and memory would be swept away? These monuments may be not only feats of engineering, but warnings. Azazel's tale also reveals another truth. Those who shared forbidden knowledge were punished. The watchers are bound in chains, sealed beneath mountains, until the day of judgment. Their children, the Nephilim, are destroyed by flood. And yet, fragments of their gifts survived. Metallurgy, writing, astronomy, all of which became the foundation of later civilization. It is as though humanity was allowed to keep just enough to rebuild, but not enough to repeat the mistakes of the age before. This duality, knowledge as both gift and curse, haunts every myth. The serpent opens human eyes but brings exile. Prometheus gives fire but suffers eternal torment. The Watchers offer wisdom but doom their offspring. The message is clear. Wisdom has a cost, and those who bestow it pay a price as heavy as those who receive it. Yet without it, humanity would remain in darkness. Perhaps this is why myths linger so strongly. They remind us that progress is never free, that every step forward carries the shadow of loss. When we look at our own age, the echoes are unsettling. We wield knowledge capable of altering genes, splitting atoms, and reaching the stars. Each gift carries the same double edge. Are we repeating the pattern, inheriting wisdom too powerful for our stewardship? If the flood was meant as a reset, then perhaps myth is warning us that resets come again and again, whenever knowledge exceeds wisdom. As the wind moves through the ruins of ancient temples, one can almost imagine those long-ago sages whispering through stone. Remember what was lost. Remember why. For knowledge without balance does not lead to light. It leads to fire, flood, and silence. If the theme of forbidden knowledge shows us the gifts that shaped humanity, then the theme of hidden knowledge reveals what was deliberately concealed. Again and again, myths and texts hint that not all wisdom was meant to be shared, that some truths were locked away in stone, guarded by priests, or buried beneath the sands to await another age. This secrecy, whether divine decree or human choice, is one of the most enduring mysteries of ancient lore. Take the story of Enoch himself. In his visions, he is shown the heavenly tablets, records of cosmic law, calendars of stars, and prophecies of ages to come. These tablets are described as indestructible, written not on parchment but on a substance that cannot decay. To some, they are metaphors for divine order. To others, they sound suspiciously like technology, crystalline data, artifacts designed to endure catastrophe. If such objects existed, where are they now? Legends suggest they were hidden in sanctuaries, sealed in mountains, or even placed beneath the earth to be discovered only when humanity was ready. The Egyptians spoke of the House of Thoth, a chamber beneath the sands where sacred scrolls were stored, containing the secrets of the stars and the knowledge of the gods. Greek writers repeated this, claiming that before the flood, Hermes Trismegistus placed books within the pyramids to preserve them for the world to come. Arab chroniclers echoed the same tale, identifying Idris, Enoch, with Hermes, and suggesting that the Great Pyramid itself was a vault of hidden wisdom. Whether symbolic or literal, the story insists that knowledge was preserved intentionally, sealed away against destruction. Similar stories appear elsewhere. In India, The Vedas describe hidden cities of the Nagas, serpent beings who guard treasure and wisdom in subterranean realms. In Mesoamerica, myths speak of caves leading to Xibalba, the underworld, where lords of knowledge dwell. In the Andes, legends tell of tunnels beneath Lake Titicaca, where golden records are stored. Even in Jewish tradition, the Ark of the Covenant is described as holding the tablets of law, but also radiating a power so dangerous that those who touched it without permission were struck dead. Knowledge guarded, concealed, even weaponized. Why hide wisdom at all? Perhaps because some knowledge is too dangerous in the wrong hands. The Book of Enoch makes this point directly. The Watchers corrupted humanity by teaching arts that led to bloodshed and sorcery. To prevent another catastrophe, the survivors may have chosen to guard what remained, ensuring it would not be unleashed until the world was prepared. Or perhaps secrecy was simply power, knowledge held by a priestly class to maintain authority over the masses. In either case, what matters is that humanity's inheritance was not complete. We received fragments, while other pieces were locked away. Archaeology occasionally brushes against this idea. In Mesopotamia, libraries like that of Ashurbanipal contained thousands of clay tablets, but many were broken, missing, or untranslated. Among them were texts of astronomy and medicine far ahead of their time. In Egypt, the enigmatic Inventory Stela suggests that the pyramids stood before Khufu, contradicting the standard timeline. At sites like Derinkuyu in Turkey, vast underground cities stretch for miles, their original builders unknown. Were these mere refuges, or vaults for something more? Even legends of lost lands may tie to this theme. Atlantis, as described by Plato, was not only a powerful civilization, but one that possessed knowledge of incredible force. Its destruction, he wrote, was punishment for arrogance and misuse of that power. Yet he insisted the story was true, passed down from Egyptian priests who remembered an age before their own. Whether Atlantis was real or allegory, its role is the same as Enoch's Watchers, a warning that knowledge, if abused, brings ruin. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not that knowledge was hidden, but that hints of it keep resurfacing. Ancient maps like the Piri Reis chart coastlines of Antarctica centuries before exploration. Megalithic sites align with celestial patterns known only to advanced astronomers. Myths describe machines of flight and fire. Either our ancestors were more advanced than we admit, or they inherited fragments of something greater, pieces of a puzzle once whole, now scattered across time. And so humanity stands in a strange position. We are heirs to both gifts and secrets, taught enough to build civilizations but denied enough to keep us searching. The silence of stone, the whispers of myth, the gaps in our history. They all suggest that someone, somewhere, made a choice about what we were allowed to know. Whether that someone was divine, alien, or simply human, the effect is the same. We live in a world shaped as much by forgotten knowledge as by remembered truth. At night, when the stars emerge, it is tempting to imagine those hidden chambers, those sealed tablets, waiting beneath desert sands or mountain caves. If they exist, they may hold the answers to questions we have barely begun to ask. Who shaped us? Why were we taught? And most of all, what else was left behind, hidden until the next age of flood and fire sweeps the slate clean? The idea of hidden knowledge inevitably draws us into the shadowed world of secret societies and mystery schools, those groups throughout history who claimed to guard fragments of ancient wisdom. If the sages after the flood scattered seeds of knowledge, then perhaps these societies tended them, ensuring they would not die out completely. Their rituals, symbols, and initiations may seem obscure, but beneath them lies the suggestion of continuity stretching back to the age of giants and gods. The Egyptians spoke of priesthoods who alone could enter the inner sanctuaries of temples, where sacred texts were kept. These priests were not merely keepers of ritual. They were mathematicians, astronomers, and engineers, inheritors of knowledge from Tepe, the first time. Greek writers marveled at how Egyptian priests could calculate celestial cycles stretching thousands of years. To them, it seemed as if Egypt was preserving a memory older than its own monuments. From Egypt, the tradition appears to flow into Greece. The figure of Hermes Trismegistus, said to be both divine and human, became the source of the Hermetic teachings. These texts, written in the centuries after Alexander's conquest, describe a cosmos infused with divine order, where man can ascend through knowledge to become like the gods. Whether Hermes was a literary invention or a memory of Thoth and Enoch combined, the message is clear. Wisdom must be veiled, revealed only to those prepared to handle it. The Pythagoreans carried this ethos forward, surrounding mathematics with secrecy and ritual. For them, numbers were not mere quantities, but sacred realities, keys to understanding the structure of the universe. Their disciples swore oaths of silence, treating geometry and harmony as spiritual revelations. To modern eyes, this seems strange, but perhaps they were preserving something older, a recognition that knowledge was not only power but danger, to be kept from the unready. In later centuries, this tradition surfaces again in the Gnostics, who taught that hidden knowledge, gnosis, was the path to salvation. Their texts, discovered in the sands of Nag Hammadi, speak of archons, rulers who keep humanity enslaved by ignorance, and of a divine spark within that can be awakened by secret teaching. Stripped of theological language, it echoes the same theme. Knowledge withheld, knowledge dangerous, knowledge liberating. Even in medieval Europe, whispers of ancient wisdom endured. The Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, all were accused of guarding secrets inherited from Egypt, Jerusalem, or Babylon. Their symbols, the all-seeing eye, the compass and square, the twin pillars, hint at cosmic order, geometry, and continuity. Whether these groups truly held such knowledge or merely claimed its legacy, the fact remains that the idea of hidden wisdom persisted, shaping societies in subtle ways. Why does this matter? Because it suggests that myths of watchers, Nephilim, and sages did not simply vanish into the past. They resurfaced again and again, cloaked in ritual, preserved in fragments, waiting for moments when humanity could glimpse them once more. The flood may have erased a civilization, but its echoes survived in secret lineages, hidden texts, and whispered teachings. Consider also the role of prophecy. The Book of Enoch itself is filled with visions of what is to come, of final judgment, of cycles repeating. Many cultures preserve similar prophecies. The Mayan calendar predicting ages and renewals, the Norse vision of Ragnarok, Hindu cosmology with its endless cycles of yugas. Each insists that history is not linear, but cyclical, that catastrophes return, and that knowledge from the past will be needed again when the cycle turns. Secret societies may not have been preserving knowledge for curiosity's sake, but for survival. Modern archaeology occasionally stumbles upon hints of this continuity. In South America, ancient tunnels connect temples miles apart, their purpose unclear. In Tibet, lamas speak of hidden cities in the Himalayas, where wisdom from past ages is guarded until humanity is ready. In the Middle East, stories of the Emerald Tablets, indestructible records of Hermes, continue to resurface. Always there is the same theme. Something is hidden, waiting. And perhaps this explains why myths linger so stubbornly. They are not entertainment, but encryption. They conceal truths too dangerous, too strange, or too precious to state outright. To read them literally is to miss the point, but to dismiss them as fantasy is to ignore their persistence. They are coded messages, scattered across cultures, waiting for those willing to piece them together. When we look at the sweep of history, it is tempting to see only ruins, fragments, and legends. But perhaps these are not random relics. Perhaps they are deliberate, a trail left for us by ancestors who knew that cycles repeat, that floods return, and that only those who remember will endure. And so we are left with a haunting possibility that the story of Enoch, the Watchers, the Nephilim, and the Sages is not only our past, but our future, that the hidden knowledge preserved in temples, texts, and secret orders is meant for a time yet to come. The flood may not have been the end. It may have been the warning. If hidden knowledge was meant to be preserved for future ages, then the question becomes, what exactly was being guarded? The myths and traditions hint at more than moral lessons. They suggest sciences, technologies, and cosmologies that surpass what we expect from antiquity. To consider this possibility is to imagine that fragments of a lost civilization's achievements were scattered into myth, waiting to be recognized. Astronomy is one of the clearest examples. Ancient cultures tracked the heavens with precision that still surprises scholars. The Sumerians mapped the motions of planets, distinguishing them from stars, and recorded cycles lasting thousands of years. The Egyptians aligned temples and pyramids to Orion and Sirius, measuring stellar risings with uncanny accuracy. The Mayans built calendars so exact that they rival our own atomic measurements, predicting eclipses centuries in advance. How did early societies, supposedly emerging from primitive conditions, master such complexity so quickly? The myths provide one answer. They were taught. The Watchers, the Anunnaki, the sages of every culture were described as masters of the skies, descending from the stars and imparting their knowledge before vanishing again. Mathematics follows the same pattern. The Great Pyramid encodes the value of pi and the golden ratio in its proportions, numbers we claim were discovered much later. At Teotihuacan, the layout of the city reflects astronomical units of measurement. In India, Vedic texts describe vast cycles of time, yugas, that span thousands and even millions of years, echoing modern ideas of cosmic timescales. Were these coincidences, or remnants of a system of knowledge preserved through myth and architecture? Medicine, too, bears strange echoes. The Book of Enoch accuses the Watchers of teaching root-cutting, the use of plants for healing and sorcery. In Sumerian texts, deities like Gula presided over healing, with records of surgical instruments and treatments carved into tablets. The Egyptians embalmed bodies with chemical precision, using resins and techniques that modern science has only recently unraveled. In India, Ayurvedic texts describe surgery, anesthesia, and complex herbal remedies thousands of years before similar advances in Europe. If this knowledge was inherited, then perhaps it was but a fraction of what once existed. Even more startling are the myths that suggest technologies resembling ours. Indian epics speak of vimanas, flying machines armed with weapons of light. The Mahabharata describes a weapon that made the sun shine like many suns, scorching the earth and blinding warriors, images disturbingly similar to nuclear devastation. In Mesopotamian tales, gods wield mez, objects of power that sound like devices, governing domains from music to warfare. In Greek myth, Hephaestus forges automatons, mechanical beings that serve the gods. Were these pure imagination or memories of machines from an earlier age, interpreted through the language of story? Archaeological anomalies deepen the mystery. Out-of-place artifacts, mechanical gears in the Antikythera device, batteries in Parthian jars, maps showing Antarctica ice-free, suggest knowledge out of sync with conventional timelines. Each is debated, often dismissed, but together they form a mosaic that echoes the myths. Glimpses of a lost science, fragments too scattered to reconstruct, but too persistent to ignore. The question then arises, why was this knowledge lost? The flood is the simplest answer. A catastrophe erased civilizations, drowned cities, and scattered survivors. But myths also suggest deliberate suppression. The gods, angered by humanity's corruption, withdrew their gifts. The Watchers, punished, left their secrets incomplete. Survivors may have chosen to preserve only fragments, fearing another disaster if full knowledge were unleashed. Humanity, then, inherited only echoes, enough to rebuild, but not enough to repeat the errors of the age before. This idea changes how we see progress. What if civilization is not a linear ascent, but a cycle of inheritance and loss? What if each leap forward is less invention than remembrance, fragments of a library long destroyed? If so, then our own technologies may not be unprecedented, but rediscoveries of principles known in another age. We may be walking paths once trod before, unaware of how the story ended last time. The haunting possibility is that the warnings in myth are not metaphor. When Enoch describes the Watchers teaching metallurgy and war, when Indian epics warn of weapons that scorch the earth, when Greek tales speak of hubris punished by divine wrath, perhaps these are not symbolic tales of pride, but historical memories of knowledge abused. Perhaps the flood, the destruction, the exile of sages were all attempts to reset a world spiraling out of control. As we look at our own age, with weapons capable of ending civilizations and technologies advancing faster than wisdom, the parallels are unsettling. Are we replaying an ancient cycle? Will our monuments, our machines, our stories one day be dismissed as myths by future survivors who rebuild among our ruins and whisper of gods who gave fire and flood? The stars remain above us, unchanged, the same sky watched by Enoch, by Sumerian priests, by Mayan astronomers. They remind us of continuity, of cycles turning endlessly. If hidden knowledge was preserved, perhaps it waits for us not in stone chambers or buried scrolls, but in the very heavens, encoded in the stars that rise and set with tireless precision. To look upward is to see what our ancestors saw, to glimpse the cosmic order they sought to preserve. And so we find ourselves heirs to a puzzle, fragments of wisdom scattered across myth, monument, and memory, pointing to a truth too vast to ignore. The knowledge was real, it was powerful, and it was lost, for reasons we may be living toward once again. If fragments of forgotten knowledge shaped the dawn of civilization, then the question that remains is, who were the keepers of that knowledge, and what became of them? Myths across the world suggest that while most of the great beings, the giants, the watchers, the gods, vanished in the flood or were bound in shadow, a few remained among humanity, hidden in plain sight. Their presence was remembered not in temples alone, but in bloodlines, dynasties, and secret lineages that claimed descent from beings more than human. In Mesopotamia, kingship was said to descend directly from the Anunnaki. The Sumerian king list records rulers whose reigns lasted thousands of years before the flood, only shortening afterward as mortality increased. These figures are described less as ordinary men than as semi-divine shepherds, chosen to guide humanity. In Egypt, the pharaohs were not merely rulers, but gods on earth, their lineage traced back to Ra, Horus, and Osiris. In China, the emperors called themselves sons of heaven, their authority derived from the mandate of heaven. In Mesoamerica, rulers often styled themselves as descendants of Quetzalcoatl or Viracocha, carrying divine blood. The pattern is clear. Political power was legitimized by claims of otherworldly origin. Could these lineages be more than metaphor? Genetic memory is an idea that lingers at the edges of science, the suggestion that fragments of experience can be carried through DNA. If the Watchers or Anunnaki mingled with humanity, then traces of their legacy might persist in ways we do not fully understand. Perhaps the extraordinary lifespans recorded in early texts, or the sudden appearance of genius in art and science, are echoes of something carried in hidden bloodlines. At the very least, the myth insists that humanity is not a closed system. Something else mingled with us, leaving a mark still felt in the myths of kings and gods. Folklore often sharpens this suggestion. In Europe, the Merovingian dynasty was rumored to descend from a sea being. In Ireland, rulers traced lineage to the Tuatha De Danann, beings remembered as luminous and immortal. In the Middle East, traditions speak of tribes descended from the Nephilim. Even the Bible preserves hints. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also afterward, a cryptic admission that traces of these beings endured beyond the flood. If descendants walked among us, then secrecy may have been as much survival as strategy. To reveal their origin would invite fear or violence. Better to cloak themselves in the symbols of priesthood or monarchy, guarding fragments of knowledge in temples, rituals, and bloodlines. Secret societies may be echoes of this survival instinct, their initiations and oaths preserving memories of an age when knowledge was dangerous and power came from mingling heaven and earth. But survival may not have been physical alone. Many myths suggest that even when bodies perished, spirits endured. The Book of Enoch claims that the souls of the Nephilim became wandering entities, unable to return to heaven or earth, doomed to haunt mankind as demons. Other traditions speak of shining ones, spirits who guide or deceive humanity. In Greece, heroes of semi-divine blood were often elevated to the stars after death, their spirits immortalized as constellations. In Mesoamerica, The souls of great rulers were believed to transform into celestial bodies, ensuring their influence continued. If true, then the legacy of the giants and sages may not only be in stone and blood, but in the unseen forces shaping human imagination. There are also whispers of survival in hidden realms. Myths speak of underworlds not as places of the dead, but as refuges. The Nagas of India are said to dwell in subterranean palaces of gold and light. The Tuatha De Danann are said to have retreated into mounds, living in hidden worlds beneath hills. Tibetan traditions tell of Shambhala, a kingdom concealed in the Himalayas, where wisdom of past ages is preserved. Could these be metaphors for forgotten cultures? Or are they memories of real refuges, societies that endured the flood in secret places, surfacing occasionally as teachers or rulers before fading again? Even today, rumors persist of encounters in remote places, stories of giants in Afghanistan, of red-haired mummies in China's Tarim Basin, of megalithic ruins deep in jungles or deserts. These are dismissed as legend, yet they echo the same themes. Survivors, hidden lineages, remnants of beings who once walked openly on the earth. What does this mean for us? It suggests that humanity's story is incomplete, that we are not simply the product of random evolution or divine creation, but heirs to a mingling with something else, something remembered in myth as gods, giants, or sages. Their physical presence may be gone, but their influence lingers in our stories, our ruins, our symbols, perhaps even our genes. To trace this influence is to glimpse a truth too vast to fit into conventional history. And if they survived, even in hidden form, then perhaps they are still here. Watching, waiting, guiding in ways we do not recognize. Myth may not be memory alone. It may be a living inheritance, whispering across generations, reminding us that the line between mortal and divine was once far thinner than we dare to admit. If remnants of the ancient ones survived in bloodlines and memory, then perhaps their greatest legacy is not in rulers or ruins, but in the stories that shaped humanity's imagination of the cosmos. For when we turn our gaze upward, we find the same patterns repeated again and again. Myths that tie our origins not just to the earth, but to the stars. The Watchers are described as descending from the heavens. The Anunnaki are said to have come from a distant planet, Nibiru. The sages of Egypt, India, and Mesoamerica are portrayed as radiant beings, shining like the sun. Even the giants, for all their violence, are often linked to constellations or celestial events. It is as though the memory of a connection with the stars could never be erased, no matter how many floods swept the earth. The stars themselves are enduring markers. Long after temples crumble and scrolls decay, Orion still rises, Sirius still burns bright, the Pleiades still shimmer like jewels. Ancient peoples encoded their myths into these constellations so that the story would outlast stone. The Book of Job, one of the oldest in the Bible, asks, "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt?" These words echo the same reverence seen in Sumer, where the stars were the dwelling places of gods. The Egyptians aligned pyramids to Orion and Sirius because they believed their pharaohs would ascend to join them. In Greece, heroes like Perseus and Heracles became stars after death. Again and again, the sky is treated not as distant lights but as a map of memory, a reminder that we came from elsewhere and may return there again. Modern science has uncovered something eerie in this regard. The Dogon's knowledge of Sirius B, the invisible companion star, cannot be explained by naked-eye observation. Ancient structures from Britain to Cambodia align not only with the sun and moon, but with equinoxes, solstices, and planetary cycles measured over centuries. These alignments suggest careful observation, but also the possibility of inherited knowledge. Could it be that the Watchers, the Anunnaki, or the sages were astronomers of a kind we cannot imagine, and that they embedded their science in myths so that even when memory failed, the sky itself would remind us? The myths also speak of return. Quetzalcoatl promised to come again from across the sea. Viracocha vanished, but left behind the expectation of his reappearance. The Anunnaki, in some interpretations, vowed to return when Nibiru's orbit brought it close once more. Even Enoch, taken into heaven, is said to accompany judgment at the end of days. These are not stories of permanent departure, but of absence with the promise of return. Whether literal or symbolic, they kept alive the sense that humanity's story is unfinished, that the teachers of the past may one day walk among us again. If that return were real, what would it mean? Would we welcome them as gods, as our ancestors did, bowing in awe to their knowledge and power? Or would we resist, wary of repeating the corruption and violence that once demanded the flood? Myths do not give a clear answer, but they all insist that such encounters are double-edged. To be given knowledge is also to risk destruction. To be elevated is also to be judged. The Watchers who once descended brought wisdom, but also doom. Their children, the Nephilim, became monsters. The sages preserved survival, but often at the cost of secrecy. The return, if it comes, would not be simple. It would be the reopening of a wound, the repetition of a cycle. Perhaps that is the true purpose of the myths, not to describe the past alone, but to warn the future, to remind us that we have walked this path before, that we are not the first to master knowledge, nor the first to misuse it, that floods and fires come when balance is lost, and that only fragments endure. The promise of return may be less about beings descending from the sky and more about the cycle itself returning. Another flood, another judgment, another chance to begin again. And yet, in these myths, there is also hope. The survivors always endure. The sages always appear. Knowledge is never destroyed completely, only hidden, waiting to be uncovered. Humanity, though fragile, carries forward a spark that even floods cannot extinguish. Whether the Watchers were angels, aliens, or archetypes, their story insists that we are more than animals stumbling in darkness. We are beings shaped by contact with the divine, for good and for ill, and our destiny is tied to the stars above us. As we stand in the modern world, with telescopes that see galaxies and machines that probe atoms, we find ourselves strangely close to the vision of Enoch, mortals glimpsing the structure of creation. The danger is the same as in his time. Will we use this knowledge to ascend or to destroy? Myths whisper that the answer decides not only our future, but the turning of the next cycle. The story that began with whispers in forgotten scrolls now stretches across continents, weaving through temples, ruins, and stars. We have followed the Watchers as they descended to Earth, breaking boundaries and shaping humanity in ways both wondrous and terrible. We have walked among their children, the Nephilim, towering giants whose hunger and violence brought chaos. We have stood in awe before the sages who appeared after the flood, preserving fragments of knowledge, guiding scattered survivors towards new beginnings. And we have traced the monuments they left behind, massive stones aligned with the heavens, silent messages carved into the bones of the earth. At every step, the question has remained: are these only myths, or are they memories of a truth too strange to fit within the walls of history? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one or the other, but in recognizing that myth is history remembered through symbol. To dismiss it as fantasy is to ignore its persistence, echoing in every culture across oceans and centuries. To take it literally is to miss the poetry by which our ancestors clothed truths too vast for plain words. The Book of Enoch, the epics of Sumer and Babylon, the myths of Greece, Egypt, India, and the Americas, all are different tongues telling the same tale. That humanity is not alone, that we are shaped by forces beyond ourselves, and that every age rises from the ashes of one before. The flood, then, is more than an event. It is a symbol of the cycle that defines existence. Knowledge rises, corruption spreads, catastrophe strikes, and from the wreckage a remnant begins again. Each time, sages appear to guide, monuments are raised to remember, and myths are told to warn. We live in such a cycle now, armed with knowledge that can heal or destroy, facing choices that echo those of the watchers. The danger is the same: to mistake power for wisdom, to misuse gifts until judgment falls. The warning is clear, written not only in scripture, but in stone and star. And yet, there is hope. Myths do not end in silence. The sages always return. The survivors always endure. The spark is never extinguished. Even if civilizations collapse, fragments remain. Whispers, ruins, symbols, waiting to ignite the imagination of the next cycle. Humanity is fragile, but resilient. Always reaching upward, always searching the heavens for the memory of where we came from. Perhaps one day we will rediscover what was lost. Perhaps we already have, piecing together scattered truths from archaeology, astronomy, and myth. Or perhaps we are destined to walk the same path again, repeating the cycle until we learn the balance between knowledge and wisdom. Whatever the answer, the myths remind us that we are more than dust and chance. We are heirs to a story older than history, a story of gods and giants, floods and fire, wisdom hidden and revealed. And so, as the night deepens and the stars take their places overhead, we are left with a choice: to dismiss these tales as dreams, or to see in them the faint outline of a forgotten truth. The whispers of Enoch, the ruins of the ancients, the memories of floods and sages, they all point to a past richer, stranger, and more entangled with the heavens than we dare to imagine. To listen is to remember. To remember is to awaken. And to awaken is to see that our story is not finished. It is only the latest turn of a cycle as old as time.